Testing, testing.
We're going to have welcome by the commissioner. Okay. Kevin?
Explain and what we're going to be doing and following for the remote viewing of this meeting. All participants will be muted when they join the meeting, but participants will be able to address the board during the open forum portion of the meeting. We do ask you identify yourself when speaking. Participants can only send chat messages to the host. For those joining us via Zoom, if you have a question or technical issue during the meeting, please use the raise hand or chat feature. To access the raise hand or chat feature at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device, you'll see a menu bar. You may have to move your mouse or touch the screen to have the menu bar to pop up. In the middle of that menu, there's a chat icon, which you can click on to show that chat dialog. You should also see the raise hand option. Please utilize the raise hand or chat feature if you have any questions or comments, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. If any members of the media have joined us via Zoom, please utilize the chat feature or email media@idem.in.gov if you have any questions.
Thank you. And now we have the commissioner of IDEM that will join in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Lenz, a member of the committees, a member of the board. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak today. I am the newly appointed commissioner of IDEM. December 13th, I think was the date. It's been a little bit over a month. I know many of you in my past work at IDEM, either through legislation of some kind or an issue maybe I worked with you all on with as a chief of staff to Bruno. So I look forward to working with you all in the future and years to come. Quickly, I want to introduce my new chief of staff. Her name's Parvani Stover. She's on the call as well today. Doesn't have an environmental background, but she has a lot of state background. She worked with Department of Child Services, Attorney General's office, and Department of Corrections, and she's really good at getting things done and solving problems. And so that's a big reason why I thought she was the best candidate for the chief of staff. It's not necessarily the subject matter experts that you need in these roles. It's who can you contact to get things done. So, and to have a open mind on issues. When you don't know environmental issues, maybe like some of us who've been in these things for so long, you stop asking questions that maybe should be answered on, like, why are we doing it this way? Can we do it differently? Is there a better way to serve our constituents? Things like that. So one of the things I was asked to talk about are, what are my priorities? This year, I have a list of about 5 things that I'm really interested in either tackling or moving forward. First one is I'm really excited about is IDEM and Department of Homeland Security teamed up, and we're going to be collecting PFAS foam from fire stations. The contract is out now for bid, and we're really excited to help the fire industry, and it's one of the governor's agenda items. So that's something we're really excited about. There's legislation right now, if you have been paying attention to the 3rd floor at the State House on solid waste, and that is something that has been a thing I've wanted to tackle even before the bill came out. There are different subsets of industries or folks that have great ideas on recycling or reuse, and a lot of the times they only have 2 options with IDEM, either a legitimate use approval or a solid waste processing permit. And that solid waste processing permit is used to permit not only some of these smaller folks that are maybe reusing metal or wood or whatever, and it's also used for transfer stations. And there's a big difference in between. And so my goal is to find some lower level permitting or lower level rules or regulation that can be implemented to help these folks out so they're not caught in something that maybe is not meant for them. 3 other topics are that I want to try and tackle this year or work towards tackling is we still have a number of lead contamination sites in the state. There's one in particular here in Indianapolis that I am concerned about, and it's not under any kind of IDEM or EPA program right now. And so there's about 1,000 homes that have lead on site. And I'd really like to figure out a way with EPA to take care of those properties, especially given the fact that EPA and the federal government is doling out cash in the way that they are. I'm really trying to leverage them to give us some money outside of wastewater and water infrastructure to help with that situation. Environmental justice is something that's front and center with the Biden administration. And we are having to deal with that like all the other states. And I think we're in a similar position that all the other states are in which we don't really know what that means or what to do. And so we are working with EPA to figure out what aspects of our work do we need to incorporate environmental justice, and what does that look like? We did receive a letter in East Chicago about a hazardous waste facility that is currently getting a renewal. And so we're going to have to respond to that letter and our ideas on how to address their concerns with environmental justice. So that is something that we are working on, and we'll continue to work on as we figure out from EPA what exact things they are looking for and what they're not looking for, which right now they don't even know. So it's an interesting box to be in. And then finally, you know, we're looking at our air permit fees again. We did an increase in air fees 2 years ago. It was $2 million. And our program needs about $11 or $12 million to run. So that $2 million got us to that $11 million mark, but within a year and a half, that money was gone. And that the reason for that is the air program is funded differently than any other program that we have. It's based on emissions or how much emissions that industry puts out. The emissions have gone down so incredibly much that every time we do an increase that's based on the emission rate, we see the benefit for only about a year and then it's gone. But we still have all the work and all the permitting and all the compliance that we still need to do. So we are working to try and figure out a way to tackle that without having a big impact on industry. And then finally, you know, talking with Peggy and Doug and others, I am excited, and it has been a priority for us to get our backlog of claims down. I'm excited that we're down to 66 claims and under $2 million total and money that's in the backlog sphere. You know, a year or two ago, Bruno made the commitment to the governor's office to tackle this problem. And at the time we had like 250 claims that were backlogged. And so it is really exciting that we're under 100 and we keep tackling it. And I think last time Doug and I talked, we should be done sometime in the spring with the backlog. So I'm really excited about that. And then I also heard that an issue that you all might talk about at some point today on some letters that we sent out on compatibility. And I just want, I don't know all the information around it, but I do want to emphasize that I have tasked Doug and John to work with everyone and Peg, to work with you all and to work with Brad and used to be called IPCA. I never can remember the new acronym. To work on timing and solutions to deal with this issue, understanding that it's part of the regulatory scheme, but I don't want to have some kind of impact on businesses where they're unable to operate. And I don't know if it's something that we want to tackle this year in the legislative session, but maybe it is something next year we can look at tackling on. Is there a possibility of using potential ELF money to pay for some of these things, some compliance measures, not only compatibility, but other compliance measures? I think it does the state a lot more good to stem off problems as they before they become big contaminated sites. So you know, that's something Doug and I have been talking about for a while, but I'm sure we'll be interested in hearing all of your feedback as well on what are some other uses that potentially could be used with ELF money that have the same similar mission of being an insurance fund for tanks and continue to move the state forward. So with that's kind of all I had. I'm happy to answer any questions. I do have to jump off in 15 minutes, but really happy to be here with all you guys virtually and hopefully next time in person.
Thank you, Commissioner. Does anybody have any questions while we have him at our disposal here? Okay, I guess not. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. Next on my various list here. We have the fund administrator's report, and one of them says that that will be John Morris.
Well, good afternoon. My name is John Morris. I'm the Petroleum Branch Chief here for the Office of Land Quality here at IDEM. I appreciate everyone's time today. I will provide an update here to our. It's working here.
Not to interrupt you, John. Our packet that we got is, I assume, a little out of order.
Yeah, recently, this last week, we had a reorganization of our numbers. So what I can do, we've provided an update in the slide here that we'll present to you. And what I can do after this meeting is provide a updated copy. So this slide right here would be page 18 and 19, I believe, from your presentation. So this was embedded in my original presentation, and this was moved up to the beginning. Just to go ahead and make sure that we have the fiscal report provided in front of the meeting.
I just wanted us to make sure we were looking at the right thing as you were presenting your information. So
Yes, sir.
I've got to move ahead here.
So for you, it would be page roughly 18 on your spreadsheet, and we can work with Carla and get an update of this slide. But right here, this is the fiscal year so far for 2022 as of December 31st. As Grant, our Chief Financial Officer, discussed last meeting, we have our appropriation still at 37.2 million less reserve, with our total available budget of 35.838 million. Our expenses so far to December 31st is 6.556 million. Claim payments so far for fiscal year 2022 has been $3,979,275, which is about the middle of the page right here. So far, we're still under the 11% for administrative costs. We're at 5.92%. We also have an update towards the bottom of this page here for fuel inspection fees, being 23.4 million for total revenue, with an ending fund balance of $135,434,324. I should point out some of the claim payments in the 3.9 million. That does incorporate some claims submitted during this fiscal year, as well as pending claims that were submitted in the prior fiscal year as we're processing payments. So that does incorporate a little bit of overlap depending on when we're process some of these claims. I think at the moment.
So the number presented by the commissioner with 2 million outstanding of the 66 million claims obviously is not included in that number. It hasn't been taken out yet because it hasn't been paid yet.
Correct. I know Katie, I'm going to have just a little bit talk today. I'll give the fiscal report, but I'm going to have each section chief come up today and give a brief section update. And I had Katie run some numbers this morning to give a little bit more of an accurate number of where our pending claims looks like. I know when I ran it just the 24th, so 3 days ago, we had at the time a total of 178 claims in-house. That includes claims that were submitted the 24th, the 23rd, claims that are not passed up any type of 60-day time frame or 45 business days. At the time when we had plus 60 days, Brian, I think, mentioned 66. At the time when I ran this 3 days ago, we were at 80. So 80 claims at 1.4 million. Total claims in-house, 178 claims at 2.746 million. And so when Katie gives her presentation about the section update, she should be able to provide a little bit better accurate number, because obviously we're processing claims and sending claims to accounting. So
would that include that her presentation? Will that include numbers such as how many days are over 60, how many days are over 90, and so on?
I don't know if we broke it out completely like that, but yes, we should be able to do that. What we basically tracked is over 60. We do have claims, for example, in the next slide here. Before I move on to the slide, is there any questions on this particular slide? We can always come back to it if there are questions. But to your question here, I have a little bit more information. I skipped the slide, but I do plan on covering this in the slide right there, you're looking at Dr. Lentz, it's this slide. So that's going to give a little bit more of a approval time frame to what we're looking at. But backing up a little bit, I can at least give you a little bit more of a petroleum storage tank excess liability trust fund update here. It's a little hard to see, but it's revenue at the top line per month, along with payouts. So we have July through December here. You can see we're averaging anywhere from 3.8 to 4 million in revenue every month, along with payouts ranging from 400,000 up to close to $1 billion. So here we have the 3.979 paid out.
The payouts, is that reimbursements or what is payouts?
Yes, sir.
That question will get to the next slide. These
Sure.
numbers don't jaggle my mind.
Like I said before, the 3.9 million includes claims that were received in fiscal year 21. And so say you submitted a claim in June of the year, we might have processed that in August. And so that claim would be paid out here in August. And so therefore it's reflected that we've paid out almost $4 million over the past 6 months. This amount here shows claims just in the fiscal year 2022. So we've had from July to December 5.2 million requested. When I look at my updated numbers, since we submit this slide upstairs weeks ago, we have to get our package together weeks in advance for this meeting. That number that I have is closer to 1.7 million instead of 1.08. So if that's what you're going to be asking about, that's usually what this talk about.
That's my question. 863 against your 3.9. This is what was reimbursed the last 6 months of the fiscal year 2022.
Mm-hmm.
On the previous slide, it says 3.9.
Correct. That's just what has been processed in the fiscal year. So this is just claims submitted this fiscal year.
Right.
So we have 5.2 million, and from my numbers, we're about 1.7 we've paid out from claims only submitted in fiscal year 2022. So out of the 3.9 that we've paid out, 1.7 has been only for claims submitted this fiscal year.
So the 863 is going to 1.7.
The 1,018,000 is 1.7. I don't have the total amount, I guess, reimbursed. Katie may have that number. A lot of that goes into play related to deductible amounts. So obviously you can see a difference here of 200,000 or roughly 150,000. If there are deductibles, that's withheld from that.
Just so I understand, there was 5 million claims and 863 paid out. That's telling you?
That's what the slide says, correct.
So that's like 16% of the claims are being paid out.
Yes, and what we have here as well is 2.7 hasn't even been reviewed yet out of the 5.2.
You've received, of the 5.2, you've received, what you're saying is 2.7 million that you have not looked at those claims yet.
No.
They're in the 5.2.
Correct.
So of what you looked at, you've approved 1.7 and somewhere north of 863.
Yeah, I don't have that number to reflect the total amount reimbursed for 860.
But when this slide was produced, that's where we stood.
Yeah, there was roughly 150,000 difference between
That
what was
number-
approved and what was reimbursed.
I think for future reference, that number that you have that you say 5.2, but yet some of them have not even been looked at yet. That might be helpful for our review here, because we just look at the numbers. We've had, all of us have had this a couple of weeks, and we say, gosh, total approved is 19% of 5.2, and total paid out is 16% of 5.2, and those numbers look less than.
Yeah, we can reconfigure in next presentation, provide that for you. I think it's closer to the 75 or 80% we're reimbursing. We're not reimbursing 16%, if that's your question. It's just the way the numbers are being reported. Again, we paid out 3.9 over the past 6 months. We really paid 1.7 of claims submitted in fiscal year 2022. And so the remainder amount of that 3.9 were claims that were submitted prior to July 1st.
So our claim, I don't want to get too far off base here. I'll let you continue and I'll ask some questions.
No, you can go ahead.
Well, what I was going to ask, this 5.2 is the total number of claims you've received. I'm sure there's a process in your office, and I guess I don't really need to know all the details, but how long typically would one sit before it actually gets reviewed? And what causes one to sit maybe longer than another before it's looked at? Or one get processed quicker, or how does that, like if someone called and said, you've had my claims for 4 months, but yet you've had another one for 2 months and I just got paid for that one, and I haven't heard anything about my 4-month claim. How do you respond to that type of question?
I can give you a little bit of broad overview of how our claim process is, but a lot of that comes down to the complexity of the claim being submitted and whether or not there is a pre-approval process. If we're going through a pre-approval process through a scope of work form, that reasonableness and cost effectiveness has already been determined for the claim, and therefore that goes through a less scrutinized review process because there's not a need to evaluate those costs and justification rationalization. We tend to look just for the backup documentation to ensure that it is in line with what was proposed and approved. And we tend to erode on that budget and process that. So it goes through a lot less rigorous senior QC process. There's still an initial review. So every single claim that does come in, we tend to prep the claim for review to ensure that it's uploaded in VFC and we get the claim ready and assigned a claim review. That can take anywhere from a day or two for someone obviously to work through. Sometimes we get a large volume of claims on a particular day. Sometimes we might not get any. That then claim is queued for initial review by an environmental manager, who will then spend anywhere from less than a day to several days, depending on the complexity of the claim. Where we sometimes do see additional layers of review would be related to resubmittals, the technical resubmittals of the costs that have been denied related to reasonableness or cost effectiveness. That then will get queued for a separate review by a team of individuals who will then go through and evaluate that, and sometimes talk and reach out to the project manager or reach out to Katie Blackburn, the section chief, or myself. That review then will be processed, documented, because we need to show our work and we save that. Sometimes we have to reach out to the council as well to have a potential statutory interpretation done for us to determine what was provided, the information, what we can rationalize for reimbursement. And based on that information, we then will send the claim back to the initial reviewer to make any type of additional changes or adjustments to that claim if there's not 100% payment done on that technical resubmittal, which then that claim then would go to the senior QC reviewer just to ensure the accuracy of the claim. And, all changes have been made. Once that claim gets to the senior QC, that was usually our backlog for when we had this pending claim in largeness. We didn't originally have that go back to the initial reviewer. So the claim would sit waiting for the senior QC, and the senior QC person would identify that there was a technical resubmittal under the claim that needed that reasonableness evaluation. And so that caused that additional delay. We've since now moved to that stage to the initial reviewer, so we can cut down on the additional claim time sitting queued waiting for technical review. So that we now have the initial reviewers initiating that, queuing that up for us to concurrently do the technical review during that initial review phase. The senior QC makes sure that that's done appropriately, and then we go to Katie for final claim review, which is a pretty streamlined process. And then we get that processed over to our administrative support team.
But as they come in, none is given a higher priority than the others, although some go through the process quicker. Seems to me that's what you're telling me.
Yeah, the senior, I look at the senior or any type of scope of work forms that have pre-approval. For lack of a better term, I call that maybe a carpool lane where you see on the highway. We don't have them here in Indiana, but there's obviously around the country. You tend to have a faster lane during rush hour, and that's what we have set up for a claim with pre-approval. This claim will, the only thing that's really different during that initial review is there'll be the budget erosion process. We've structured Excel documents with the help of Jay Goulet to set up our claim to mirror our erosion process to mirror what was approved in the South. And so as that budget is eroded, you could have a year's worth of quarterly monitoring events, say 4 quarters. And as you erode on the budget and submit your claims, we will then erode on your total approval of the project. So we know when we might hit a wall, for example, maybe project manager, project plan prep, or report writing. And so that's one process that we do to ensure that we don't overpay from what was pre-approved. And so that is an extra step that is done during that initial review, but we don't have senior QC on the claim. That claim comes directly to me. I have my staff that highlight it as a red flag, a high priority email. And as soon as those come in my email, I do a cursory review and send it to
At any point during this review, would you or one of your reviewers ever send an email out to the person that prepared the claim, or a phone call to the person that prepared the claim and ask questions if there was a discrepancy or something that was missing that you felt needed to be there? Is there a give and take with the claim preparer and with the claim reviewer?
Yes, we instruct staff to obviously have good customer service. And if there's, for example, missing documentation, or that could be more from drum disposal receipt or maybe timesheets, we try to reach out and try to rectify and get that taken care of. That way we can process a claim and not have to have the resubmittal come back for such a minor, I look at it as a minor issue that might not have come with the claim. For a technical submittal of justification, we tend not to reach out unless there's a significant problem. We've reached out a lot over the past few years since we've implemented this process and had some of these denials go out, of having meetings individually with each consultant to ensure that they have an understanding of what type of information is necessary and needed to substantiate hours for reporting or project planning prep. So we've independently kind of done that outreach with certain consultants to ensure that they have an understanding, to make sure that we're on the same page, for lack of a better term. So there is not a confusion or a misunderstanding. And we've had some people just ask, hey, can you pay me half? I spent 60 hours on this quarterly monitoring report. Can you just pay me half? Well, that didn't rationalize any of the 30 hours. It was part of it. Which 30 hours should we pay? So there is a component of, while we understand and mindful of someone just saying, can you give me half? We still don't have that understanding of what was occurred during the report writing. And I believe, like I said before at the last meeting, we do, during these reviews, mirror the two documents, the prior quarterly event and the one in question that we're looking to pay today. And we want to, we run it through PDF, Adobe, and we evaluate the number of changes that were made to the technical document. So we do have that understanding, knowing that there were 42 changes that were made to the report, third quarter to fourth quarter. That's to groundwater is 3 feet versus 3.5. Groundwater flow directions north-northwest versus north. So we're able to see the minor edits. And sometimes there are significant revisions within the conclusions or executive summary, or a discussion related to exposure threats that do change from report to report. Oftentimes the reports are very similar. Sometimes these pages are 4 pages in text. Knowing that consultants get their data submitted not only in PDF, but also in electronic data documents, Excel document that the lab gets, aids in obviously streamlining tabulation of this data within these technical reports as well. Gone are the days of when I did this 20 years ago, manually entering every significant constituent within VOCs by hand at the table. We don't really need to do that anymore. So we do evaluate that. But as far as reaching back out saying your free submittal didn't meet the muster of what we were anticipating, you requested the full amount, we don't do that. There would be a significant amount of negotiation every single time we do that. Meetings. We've met with your firm, for example, with Lisa and Brooke before to try to clarify that. And we'd be happy to, again, if there is a difference or a concern.
I guess my point is, I think any of that open communication between, not necessarily the consultant, but certainly the tank owners and any that are here, and the claim preparer, any communication is helpful to correct the problem. But I certainly understand where there's certain things where it gets at a certain level that you would not want to reach out. You need a sit down meeting or something to resolve that. So I understand that. But I think on an initial claim and an initial reviewer or someone reviewing the claim for the first time, I think any kind of open communication between UST owners, again, I know there's got to be at least some here, and also the consultant could be helpful, or the person who prepared the claim, that before it just encounters maybe, I guess I say, unnecessary delays. But your response prompted me to ask another question. Has there ever been any thoughts of why are we quarterly monitoring all the time? Why can't we do semi-annual? Why can't we sometimes do annual?
Well, there are some sites that I think that do semi-annual. I'm not sure if we have any of our sites right now that are eligible to do annual sampling. A lot of our releases are different now than historically. We're not seeing Peter product across 200 sites like we were. We're seeing some product on some sites, but it's not a significant issue. Sometimes we are trying to establish a trend, a stable trend on a particular plume, and that's why we do tend to go quarterly. We don't anticipate quarterly monitoring for 15 years on these releases anymore, like we had potentially historically in the 90s or early 2000s. So for us, 8 quarters consecutively over 2 years, that should be hopefully sufficient enough information for us to establish some sort of trend analysis, an understanding of this plume, whether it's migrating outside or not, and whether or not we feel comfortable closing the incident number. So I am mindful of that. I think Tim Veach as well is the same way, and if we do come across sites that warrant maybe a semi-annual sampling event, we would take that into consideration. What we don't want to have now is the semi-annual event take 4 years to evaluate whether the plume's stable versus maybe 2. So this time is money on these projects.
Well, I bring it up only because at some point you are regurgitating data. I mean, the data is what it is, and sometimes it's very similar. I mean, I can't speak for what consultants are charged to prepare a report or how many hours they're spending on it. So I understand the process you have to go through. You're asking for that quarterly data. The consultant's trying to give you what you want. And if you don't need it, then because it's the same or we're just regurgitating data, then I think that there'd probably be some think owners that would love it if they didn't see us every quarter, but it'd be so spicy.
I appreciate that. I think that's something we can take and further talk and discuss and see when we would be, what sites fit into that mode or model where we only want semi-annual sampling versus quarterly sampling. So yeah, I appreciate your comment.
How hard would it be to break those numbers down a little bit? In other words, really you said about first submittal about 75% approved. And that's fine, we put that up there. How about the second submittal, and then what percentage or what of the second submittal is approved? And I guess I can do a third time and so forth. So that we can actually see, is it being approved on the second time go around, or is it take a third time go around? And eventually, out of that 5 million, is it going to be almost all of it approved?
Right.
Or are we still aiming at the second and third submittal, still 75%? I think that would be an important breakdown for all of us to see. And then maybe we can try to figure out a way to take from 75% on the first submittal to 80 to 85 to 90 to 95, because every submittal costs money, time, efficiency, all that stuff.
Right.
So that might be break that down, and we can work on getting the first submittal approved. Both parties looking at it correctly and submitting it correctly would save a lot of time and energy on both parties. So I'm not sure that would be very helpful.
We can incorporate that for next meeting. And if we have our data pretty much, we've transitioned it to Power BI. So it's basically Microsoft Excel on steroids. And so we have the ability to look at a lot of our data in a very intimate fashion, and we'd be more than happy to evaluate that and structure that and make sure that the data we present here is clear. And I know that we've had numerous discussions over, particularly this slide, we're showing amount requested and not approved, but it's a significant number that does appear different. And
that's a very important number, that percentage of the technical, because otherwise paying the difference.
And we can put that back on this slide here too. We've just been focusing a little bit more on the approval time and time it takes for the claim coming through here. But we'd be more than happy to break this down and provide a bit more of the percentages if that's obviously a priority and important. We'd be happy to incorporate that within our slides.
Hey, John, just for clarification.
Yes.
When going back to the 3.9 million claims
Mhm.
versus the 863 on the third sheet, can you just try one more time to clarify why that number says 3.9 and this one says 863?
From July 1st to the present. Pardon?
Talk to us like we're kindergarten.
Yeah, from July 1st to the present, this slide shows that of any claims coming in from July 1st to now, $863,000 were paid out. We unfortunately have had a backlog of pending claims. Some of them stretching into maybe January, March, or April of 2021. And so out of those months prior to January, or sorry, July 1st, those claims, so what would that be, roughly 3.1 million? 3.1 million of claims have been paid out since July 1st, but those claims were submitted prior to July 1st. So they came in a different fiscal year. So we still have to process them. We're trying as hard as we can to get these through, make sure we're doing accurate reviews, consistent reviews. We understand that all of our reviews are scrutinized, and if we make an error or mistake, it will be pointed out to us. So we're trying to give obviously good customer service in processing these claims, but also ensuring that we can stand behind our reviews and hopefully review them consistently across the board and provide the same good care and customer service. So yeah, 3.1 came in before July 1st, 2020.
The 863 is just new claims.
The claims that were just submitted from July 1st, 2021 to now.
And the 150 discrepancy in the amount approved with the amount reimbursed is the majority of the benefits.
I would say that, yes, correct. Thank you. And eligibility percentage, some sites are not 100% eligible, and so therefore that might reflect here as the fact that you were 75% eligible, so therefore, even though the amount approved was say $100, you had 75.
It's a lot to put on, or try to put on one succinct page. So maybe we can take a stab at breaking that down and trying to tell those different stories and not make it too messy.
Yeah, Jay can make it messy. Yeah, he can. You should see some of the slides. Yeah, but yeah, if I understand, I hear you. If there's anything else as well that you find important, would you like to see different with our presentation of our numbers? We'd be more than happy to incorporate those into this presentation, just to ensure that we all have an understanding and makes it a little more clear and concise.
So your goal can be not to speak as much on this stuff. The clearer we can make it,
yes,
the less we have to get there.
I like that. I talk about it.
No,
Kind of like preventive maintenance, preventive questions.
Yes, there you go. Like
there you go. That's what I meant. Yeah. You were questioning things.
Yeah. We are making progress on obviously our claims. What we're starting to do, just to give you a little bit of an update too, when usually we were working on first in, first out. So a lot of the claims we were processing were the oldest ones and working it. What we've also started doing is working on the claims that are about to go on the over 60-day list. So we're eating both ends of the, I guess, the candle, so to speak. So not only are we working on the old claims, but we're also working on ones to prevent them from getting on the backlog. So we're staffed up finally. We have that ability to have enough reviewers to review the claims to prevent any from going on the plus 60-day list as we eat away at the ones that are already there. So I just wanted to point that out. But we are obviously mindful of how we're trying to get to this, because I hate just to remove 10 claims to have 12 go on the list because we will one week and get anything moving. So the claims are a little more complex than historically being submitted, so that does take a little bit more time. We did have to train, obviously, 4 or 5 new claim reviewers this year. It did take a little bit of time too. We tend to start the new claim reviewers on the scope of work pre-approvals. They tend to be just a little bit easier for claims to process, since a lot of that technical or reasonable and cost effectiveness are going to be determined. But I expect us not to have any claims over 60 days by March 1st is our goal.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the strategy is to make sure that you're not having backlog?
Sure, yeah. It goes back to obviously identifying when a claim needs technical review. That was probably the biggest item that we identified. It was too late in the process. So a claim, after it's been initially reviewed, it sat queued up waiting for senior QC. And it wasn't until that senior QC individual reviewing the claim identified that there was a technical resubmittal. That then got put into another queue for the technical review team to evaluate those costs. And then it went back to the senior QC person for review. Well, we only have, at the time, 3 senior QCs. That's what we have now, but we have 1 retire, and we promoted 1 to section chief. So we were down to 1 senior reviewer there for a brief period this past year. And so we needed to obviously reorganize how we reviewed our claims to ensure that we don't have these bottlenecks on top of bottlenecks occurring. And so the way we restructured it now, with the initial reviewers identifying if there's a resubmittal that warrants a technical review, we have that done in the beginning. So therefore, we can have a concurrent review at the same time.
So you don't have things in queue just sitting there and time clocks ticking, they're just sitting there and nothing's being done.
That's where our bottleneck tended to be historically, or at least in the past year or two, was within the senior QC component. And we obviously promoted 2 people into their new roles, and we were able to hire other staff to assist us in the environmental manager positions to review things. So moving forward, I don't anticipate having a pending claim over 60-day problem, especially once Epic in the database goes live here in a couple of years, where we'll have a more streamlined process to this claim review process. We won't really have that. And then also on top of the nominal policy document we'll be talking about here later today, I think that will aid in streamlining our review claims as well. So I don't anticipate having this again. And I appreciate everyone's patience as we've gotten through this issue. I'm mindful of making sure that we pay on time.
Which also in turn makes simple, because you don't have things that are so old, monthly up the numbers that were.
Right.
John, you mentioned
Yes, sir.
the claims are getting more complex. Is that primarily because there's new people reviewing, or who are getting up to speed with how these claims look, or is the work changing that you're seeing? Can you kind of briefly explain why you think those claims are getting more complex?
Yes, yeah. I guess primarily probably due to the resubmittals of the reasonable and cost effectiveness determinations that are occurring. Historically, we probably started maybe those denials in recent times. I think they haven't historically, but it was not as a frequent component of the reviews of the claims. And I think now with the restructuring and having obviously Doug Laux and Nick Smith on board, with reorganization of our claim review team, we're just in a better position to evaluate, I think, these claims and costs that were coming in that were relatively high for routine work. And we need to ensure that we spend that time, effort, and energy to ensure that we are review what someone had submitted and justifying why they feel that these hours were necessary. And so that review, which historically we had not done on the volume that we're doing, it wasn't there. When you do 1 or 2 claims like that, it's pretty easy. Our high water mark, I think we had 60 of these queued up at one time. And that then caused us to refocus, reorganize, restructure, and attack this as fast as we could, while also still maintaining quality.
So it's not the claims themselves that are getting more complex, it's the review, more robust review that items doing.
I would agree with that. Would you add anything? And again, when Katie comes up, what I'd like to her, part of her slides is also to give more of an updated numbers that we're dealing with here. Mine's, like I said, my update is 3 days old. And what I'd like to do, maybe moving forward for these meetings is I know that these slides have to get reviewed and vetted, and my management has to make sure that these look okay. Is maybe try to incorporate a little bit more real time, maybe a few days before instead of a few weeks before, so that way we have numbers that are more reflective of our current conditions. Because 1.7 is better than 1.
Well, it's not, the information is valuable. I guess I'm taking this job seriously. So what what you're presenting is what I'm looking at, and that's why I'm asking some of the questions that I'm asking. And I assume that's the reason the rest of the board is doing the same thing. So the easier it is to digest, and the more, I guess, not accurate, but more current that it is, would be helpful to all.
Sure. And for November, for example, $1 million was submitted, and we're showing that 92,000 is approved. I mean, that's obviously not something that we're doing. We're not just denying 16% of the costs.
But that's what it looked like. I mean, we're looking at this numbers, and
Sure.
just the raw data, and that jumps out at us. And then this 363 or 863 has no relevance to the 3.9, at least to me. So I'm trying to figure out.
There's still, out of this group right here, there's still 105 claims from July to December that we've not even touched. Not really. Still 5 claims from July, 4 from August, 17 from September, 17 from October, 33 from November, and 29 from December.
Well, I think a lot of people in this room look forward to the day when you don't have any over 60.
I would agree
That
with that
makes it a
statement.
lot easier for all of us.
Make my life a lot easier.
I think you'd also be happy if it's 5251718 was submitted, and 5211718 was reversed. Yeah, that was it.
It's outside of my control what is submitted to the agency. We would recommend people do it through the pre-approval process. And we actually have, I think, 143 scope of work forms approved. We've approved over $3 million in pre-approvals. So we have a fair amount of people taking advantage of the pre-approval process, and that makes our lives a lot easier. And I would imagine reduces uncertainty for restoration owners and operators, as well as consultants. So just reducing that uncertainty sometimes does help. I can't control someone who bills $300 for an FSI report when they put in 3 wells and the total foot drilled is 24 feet. It's outside of my control.
Well, it's outside of, unless it's somebody in this room that did it, it's outside of Baltimore.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think most of us would want you to do what you need to do in your capacity to make sure they don't ever do it again.
And I guess
that's probably more than just denying the claim.
I would agree with that statement. And the good thing is we're not seeing a lot of those types of situations anymore. I've been now in this position 3 years. I came in at the end of tomorrow will be my 3-year anniversary. The things I saw. Well, thank you. Yeah, I still have my hair. It's a little gray.
It's a little more gray.
But the claims I saw in the beginning in February, March of 19, we're not seeing those types of initial submittals coming through the door.
Seems to be a common theme when I talk to tank owners and even other environmental consultants that, yeah, we know that some people were doing what you described. And we all wonder, well, why does the whole industry get harmed because there's 1 or 2 bad apples? Why didn't we just take care of 1 or 2 of the bad apples and fix it that way? And then this would have solved itself.
I guess, how did the whole industry get harmed? I'm not sure I understand the question. Okay. How is the whole industry harmed by 1 or 2 bad apples?
Well, I think the review process and more robust review process when maybe that's not always necessary. If what you're describing now is you don't see those types of issues anymore that you described. So there, I think most tank owners and certainly most consultants are trying to do the right thing and just trying to get paid for the work that they've done.
We don't obviously discriminate in any capacity for any submittal. That's not just 1 or 2 people. If we see something on a particular project, we will ask for reasonable cost effectiveness determinations. And it doesn't matter who the consultant is, doesn't matter who the owner operator is. We look at the work performed and the hours incurred for example, for report writing. Or it could be even field work. We've denied for field work based on some high levels of hours submitted for such routine work. Thing in the number of wells sampled. So we tend to take it very seriously. It's important for us to be fair and rationalize. If we can rationalize a payment, even if it's on the high end, we will tend to do that. If It's something that's still above what we would consider more than routine, especially when you evaluate the report. We see that there's maybe 30 changes, or if the report's 3.5 pages and it took them 60 hours to write the report. I have hundreds upon hundreds of examples. I'd be happy to, I can make days worth of it, really, of talking about what we see. Instead of talking broad, and it's just up to the board if we want to do that. But we have seen problems, and we ask the questions, and we rationalize sometimes, maybe not full amount, but we can obviously rationalize once we have better understanding. Routinely, we saw a lot of time entries of just 2017 Q1, or 2017 FSR. There was no clarity within the time entry. What actually was being performed? Was it contaminant fate and transport modeling? Were you actually populating the executive summary? Were you working on the tables, 3-point diagram? We're seeing that now. If we're talking to our consultants, we're getting that clarity within the time entries. So we can make, what we'd like to have is that initial review be done that first time. We don't have to go through a technical resubmittal to provide that clarity to what occurred. And so we're trying to do that outreach, independent of maybe reviewing a particular claim with any particular consultant, to ensure that we're all on the same page. So the data we get, in my opinion, better. The information is more clear, and we have that ability to try to get it the first time and evaluate it. So I'm sorry that the perception is that we've harmed the industry in any capacity. I know that probably the biggest thing that has changed over time is the fact that we did mandate risk-based corrective action across our petroleum sites. That's something historically we didn't do. We had a number. You're above it. Get below it. Clean it up. We had engineered systems, where everyone in the industry knows the asymptotic level of these engineered systems hit 3 or 4 years. They've just decreased in efficiency. You've cleaned up your radius of influence for your, unless you install new extraction wells or retrofit your parts, you've done what you could to that point. And we sometimes saw, even though the GAP proposed, well, I'm going to run the system 3 years or 4 years, we came across sites where systems were running 8 to 10 years, same system, same site. We've seen systems reporting influent data as non-detect. I would drink it. That's on all of us, owners, operators, and consultants. And it's on the consultant for not turning it off. It's on the owner for not being aware of what's happening at the site and reaching the 2 million mark. And it's on us for not actually following through and saying what's going on in these quarterly reports. It's a shared responsibility. I do not disagree. So we're just trying to be mindful of that. Obviously, 1162, it came back in the House and World Act back in 2009, our RCG, and that came out in 2012. We've been trying to strive to follow that as best as we can and ensure that when we see an exposure threat, we take our time, effort, and energy to get that addressed and remediate or clean up that issue. That could be anywhere from a creek or a lake, utility corridor, vapor inside our residential home next door. Those are the things we're obviously evaluating and looking at the conceptual side of this and focusing our energy on to ensure that these plumes, that if they are causing harm to the human health environment, we get those addressed.
To follow up on that, how many eligible engineered remediation systems are out there that are running? 0. And that it's high. How many would you say there was?
Hundreds, 200, 300.
So they're just, in the opinion of the regulatory authority, there's no need for them anymore. Or there's no
I wouldn't agree with that too. There's definitely a potential need for them if there's an exposure threat that needs to be addressed.
There's just not any sites out there today that need it. That's what you're saying.
I know of one that's running, but it's been running for 30 years and it's paid by insurance. We asked them to turn it off and they still feel that they need to run it. We're mindful of anyone's money. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I was just worried about sites that you were paying for.
Right.
Alpha's paying for if there's any systems still on.
Now, and when we do approve a system again, we're going to do it differently. We're going to put them through the same process we do for a scope of work form. We're going to vote on that budget. We're going to go out to the site and take pictures of the parts and components and have an owner manual presented to us. So we have an understanding of what is in the system, serial numbers, and have a better understanding of what equipment's there.
I think it's great.
So we're going to do that with our engineer team and also the project manager. So when we do get to a point, if there is an exposure threat, God forbid, we will get that addressed. So that's the most effective remedial technology that's chosen to address the exposure threat. Sometimes digging might be something, and injecting, there's varying, obviously, as you're aware, remedial technologies that we could utilize to eliminate exposure threat from the petroleum.
Well, I would welcome that, more involvement with, if there is a system that you guys are more involved in the process. And I know in a QMR, for example, we were providing a lot of details about that system, but I don't know how many times we saw someone such as yourself or one of your staff out on site when we were putting one in, or when it was there running, or.
Yeah, we're trying to, and we're taking peeks. We're looking at systems even now when they're getting decommissioned, just to have a better understanding of what was there. We're evaluating. I had staff go back and look at the past 10 years of all of our engineered systems paid to just evaluate, see if there's any trends, to see really get a better understanding of what we've done as an agency and reimbursed and paid for. And we found some discrepancies that warrant further evaluation. But
well, I do agree with you. I think there are sites that have a need for an engineered remediation system, regardless of who's paying for it, whether it's self or insurance or just the client. And when those happen, most of the takeovers and certainly the consultants should welcome me on site to be heavily involved in that process.
Appreciate that. And once we get to a point, and maybe that would be something we've not got that formulated yet, we haven't had an approval of one yet, but I'd be more than happy to maybe next FAB meeting discuss our process and how we plan on doing it. But we're going to formalize it and obviously work with our engineering team and science services branch, along with the project managers, just to ensure that we have an understanding of what is in the system and serial numbers included, and also have a copy of the order. And work through the challenges that sometimes are faced at some of these sites with systems, and just have a bit more of an understanding of what is occurring. So we'll obviously provide updates in that regard, so we'll come across that.
Well, I apologize for spreading your portion out.
That's okay. Well, we're here to answer any questions. I know that I have my section chiefs coming up to give them updates as well, and then I'll circle back and give my a little bit more of a branch update. But we're here to answer questions. We're here to ensure that you have an understanding of what we're trying to do, not only with our plan review process, but just as a holistically in the branch. And so if you have questions at any time, we're happy to answer them. So I appreciate your questions.
John, just real quick,
yes.
Can you 2 or 3 sentences on field presence, how that might change?
Yes, we're taking just a holistic reevaluation of how our project managers interact, not only with the owners and operators, but also the consultants. And one of the things that we are doing, not only within our branch, but also potentially remediation services branch, state cleanup or VRP, is trying to have a little bit more engagement, especially from the beginning of the project. So we're evaluating when the project manager is to be out on the site, in the field, to get a better understanding of the lay of the land. Really being out of the site, sometimes you get a better understanding of where utility corridors could be, preferential pathways, overhead utilities. And so we're really working on a more unified process in Office of Land Quality to ensure we're there in the beginning, maybe even during the initial phases of drilling, or maybe during the further site investigation report, just to get a lay of the land, obviously meet the consultant, get an understanding of what happened with this release, and try to establish project expectations. So we're working, and we have been working for the past year and a half, of just trying to streamline and formalize a little bit more of this engagement to ensure that we're all working a little closer and have a little bit better levels of communication. And really starting off that project is, I think, the key thing that we've identified, and trying to be out there during the initial phase of investigation as best as we can, or out during the further site investigation. Sometimes we've not been able to get to the site until maybe corrective action or towards quarterly sampling. So it's important for us to have an understanding of where there could be exposure threats or where there could be sensitive receptors nearby that would warrant additional investigation. Sometimes you can see topographic changes when you're at the site. You can focus your investigation, and you can have that level of communication. So not only that, with a lot of our staff that have high levels of experience and have been doing this for a long time, we have them formalizing our processes, and we're working with our staff that are a bit newer to ensure that we have consistent reviews and evaluations and presence on some of our field sites. So that should be coming. Obviously, the pandemic kind of threw a little bit of a loop into field presence and how many people we could have in a vehicle at the same time. But I anticipate this coming on board a little bit more within 2022. And yes, part of that is also just engaging and making sure we have an understanding when we're going to be out in the field. So I think we will have more of a field presence. That includes training all of our staff to have an understanding of how sample collection should occur. That's sometimes where I've seen, for lack of a better term, maybe shortcuts, especially collecting VOC analysis soils. We want to ensure that not only our staff have an understanding of how samples are collected, but also consultants, just to ensure that we're getting validated. And the R2 should clarify a little bit of our processes for soil sample collection to make it a little bit easier and stricter to ensure we're all working together.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Even though I'm going to go sit down, I'll come back, and if we need to get back to some of these slides to talk anymore, we can do that.
Okay.
I'd like to have Tom Nunn, you can come up and give a little bit more of a compliance update. And then we will go to Katie Blackburn, and then it'll be Tim Beach.
Good afternoon. I'll try to keep it brief. I am Tom Newton, the Chief of the UST Compliance Section. I'm going to give you a quick update. At present, I have 8 inspectors, one of which is in training. Essentially 3.5 compliance managers, although it looks like I really need to have at least one more of those. One very good dispatcher who accounts for half of an FTE, and we recently hired an administrative assistant who was trained up within a month and is doing a great job for us. I don't remember having that particular slide in my set, but all right. No, what happened here? Okay, that's not, that was what I said to my boss, but that isn't. All right. What I was going to tell you was that the next one was going to be inspections. I can try to touch on these. These are all things that are, I guess, highlighted issues for the UST compliance section. Line tanks continue to be a problem, for lack of a better term. I don't have a hard and fast count on those since we've been going through the database reconstruction or new build. I can't run reports like I used to be able to. We used to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 line tanks about 3 years ago. I think we've knocked those down considerably. It's still amazing to me that we have any line tanks left in the state of Indiana. But we don't have the regulatory authority to require those to be removed. Tank age, it's still probably hovering around the average age of a tank in the state of Indiana is 40 years. And the UST industry, and especially the insurance industry, as well, consider that normal operational lifespan of a tank to be 25 to 30 years. We're pushing 40 as an average. Ethanol compatibility, that is another issue that we're facing a lot of complexities with. The actual ethanol compatibility rule has been in the Indiana UST rule since November the 5th of 1998, when the emergency rule was finalized. And it looks like the actual breakdown of the numbers that I had didn't show up in this. So we'll get to that here in a minute. Interstitial monitoring. Yeah, that was a requirement that went into the rule on September 2nd, 2009. What I can tell you is that about half of those systems, as of right now, the owners and operators are not utilizing them correctly. In those 50% that my inspectors take photographs of, in most cases, the primary problem is that the owners are not having the cores taken out of the Schrader valves in their STP sumps. And what that does, it negates the fact that there's a sensor sitting in the STP sump because the interstice, or that space between the two walls of the piping, wouldn't allow product to shoot out of that Schrader valve and reach the sensor if the pipe actually was breached internally. So we're finding that in a lot of sites. Contractor issue. That is one of the things we are starting to see some minor issues cropping up with contractors. And this has to do with the certified contractors that actually go out and do the work. We've had at least 3 very easily provable instances where contractors provided documentation to the owners saying that they had tested their overfill prevention equipment at their sites, and then those owners provided that documentation to us as part of an official record request. And in at least all of those, well, as 5 sites for 1 owner and 2 other sites, so it was a total of 7. Flapper valves didn't exist at those sites, and the paperwork said they did. So it's something we're paying close attention to, and pretty much from this point forward, when we come across those, or and unfortunately, it's the owner's responsibility to ensure that the paperwork and their equipment actually match. So they're probably going to be referred to enforcement. Let's see, on the inspection side, one of the slides I meant to have in here. So far, well, for fiscal year, this federal fiscal year 2022, our goal again is to do 1,350 inspections. As of right now, we're sitting at 373, which is 28% of our goal. And we are moving quicker with the 7 fully trained inspectors that we have and the 1 that's currently in training. And my last slide was going to touch on the ethanol compatibility and provide some numbers. We can probably get that and sent over for the board after this is over, so you can kind of see those. But in the state of Indiana, there's approximately 13,000 tanks, give or take, and that's steel and fiberglass at about 4,100 sites. And right now, 3,200 of those tanks are over the age of 25. That's it, and that's split out amongst a little bit over 1,000 sites. So essentially 25% of our sites have fiberglass tanks. We're just talking fiberglass now, that are almost out of their warranty period. For the 30-year-old tanks that have gone out of warranty in most cases, that's 2,200 tanks at 764 sites. And then the big one, tanks that are over the age of 41, which puts them into what we refer to as the first generation fiberglass tanks that were pre-February of 1981, that are not UL listed and are not certified to hold any level of ethanol. There are 283 of those at 122 sites. So it's not a huge number, thankfully, but those tanks, and about half of those tanks are my age. They're 50 years old, and they're still on the ground for some reason. The law allows that. Some of them may be fine, but if they've had ethanol in them, they weren't rated for it, and it could be a pretty serious issue. So that's pretty much all I had. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to provide answers. Or beyond that, I'll hand it off to Katie.
I guess I have 2 things, and one is for tank owners that have asked me to ask this, is that they have older tanks, and there's a process where you're asking for information that they simply do not have, because I assume because of the age of the tanks. How does that get resolved?
Well, it's a good question. And I know myself and senior manager will continue to talk about that some more to try to come to some sort of a better resolution. At my level as a section chief, what I can tell you is my job is to enforce the rule as it was written. And what it requires is that an owner be able to show that their tanks are UL listed tanks. If they can't, there's a couple ways they can. I mean, it's fairly simple. We can tell by the age of the installation date of the tanks when they were built. And depending on the color of the tanks, we can generally tell if it's one of the 2 primary manufacturers from back in that era. For the most part, they're either going to be the tan Owens Corning tanks, or they're going to be the maroon purple colored Xerxes tanks. And we know by year what they were certified for. So it should be, you know, and hopefully, I can't give you a percentage, but in most of those cases, they should be able to tell us by looking in their tanks, whether they're tan or purple. I'm assuming there might be some small fraction of those older tanks that are something other, like buffalo tanks, or I'm not sure what else may have been around back then. But if we can get a fairly decent idea of what kind of tanks they have and how old they are, we can tell based on data either from the ASTS WMO or the National Work Group on Leak Detection Evaluation, what those tanks were certified to hold. So in those cases, we can get a pretty decent determination. We're good with saying, okay, that's what those tanks are, and you should be good to go.
How do you see fiberglass line tanks being handled in the future?
Well, what I can tell you is that there is no rule that says they have to go away, as long as the owners actually hold to the schedule required by the rule, which is to have those liners and the tanks assessed every 5 years. EPA's original intent, which is outlined in the 1988 version of 40 CFR Part 280, was that even allowing for the lining of these tanks was only supposed to be a 10-year period to allow owners to figure out a way to replace those tanks. And of course, Indiana didn't go any further than that. We didn't get any more stringent than what the federal rule was. So what I can tell you is, you know, I personally don't have much of a love for line tanks, especially ones that are 60 years old, and we have some of those. And if they're not doing their lining inspections, or well, if they're not doing their lining inspections, there's a good chance they're probably going to end up enforcing. And I understand, I mean, there are some cases where, okay, they've had problems getting hold of a contractor. But, you know, if they had a lining inspection done 5 years ago, and there aren't that many contractors that even do those types of inspections anymore, why didn't they schedule the next inspection when they had the last one done? They waited until, you know, 4 months after their last inspection expired, on tanks that are 50, 40 years old, and now they're having problems finding a contractor. I mean, had they put together a plan, some sort of, what was the phrase I was thinking about earlier? A tank replacement plan at any point during the previous 5 to 10 years to start figuring out what they need to do to replace these tanks that are obviously woefully out of date.
But for now, if they do their 5-year inspection and it passes that internal inspection, they're good to go.
Yes. Now it has to be, you know, actually done properly with a certified contractor, and they have to follow all the steps. You know, the video inspections have tapered off a lot. Prior program management wasn't actually requiring all the steps to be followed with the video inspections. And we've only actually had one owner attempt to do a full and complete video inspection in accordance with Ken Wilcox and Associates recommended practice on videotaping line bearing tanks. And when they did the external assessment that's required via the industry standards that are cited in the rule, they messed up on the age of the tanks in the report. And by doing that, they made them appear to pass the evaluation. When they put in the correct age of the tanks, they failed. So I think those tanks are gone now. Now the video, I haven't completely internalized this, but the recommended practices that are allowed by the rule was modified somewhat by the update of the rule in 2018. So when 329 IAC 9 incorporated parts of 40 CFR in June of 2018, we took in the federal citations that covered the inspection of liners and tanks. Before, the only way you got to the video inspection was through API recommended practice 16, 13 or 31, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, that allowed for the Ken Wilcox practice. But I think the EPA opened that up a little bit more for the Petro, I think it's the Petrotech, one that's done by Technology. And I don't have that recommended practice memorized, but it's a little bit different than what it was before.
Well, I do know, a lot of things were lined in 88, so, or 98, to get into compliance. And so you did your 10-year inspection, and so in 2023, what I'm trying to say, there's going to be a lot of fiberglass line tanks that would need to be inspected internally. There are very few people that are qualified. So of those 800, I would say the majority of them in 2023.
Thanks for the reminder on that. We'll try to add that into our things to worry about. Sorry?
I believe that travel question for you online.
He's online.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Tom. This is Trout Mosier representing Indiana independent marketers. The question I have is for the contractors to be qualified, you need to be certified. And one of the things that our maintenance guys at least used to do is the tank monitor functionality test. But as we understand it now, unless they're certified, they can no longer do that.
Well, when it became a requirement under 329 IEC 9 back in 2018 to do the annual functionality tests in accordance with the recommended practice cited by the rule, that made it a requirement via 329 IAC 9-2-2F that all testing, installation, basically anybody that put their hands on a part of a UST system, which would include even hydrostatic testing of spill buckets, that those people have to be certified by the Indiana Department of Homeland Security.
Or license to set the tanks. Okay.
Is that chat left over from something else? All right, there are no further questions. I'll hand it over.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Katie Blackburn, the section chief of the UST operations section. Our current staffing, we have 4 senior environmental managers, 8 environmental managers with 1 vacancy that we're looking to fill probably in February or this spring, and 1 administrative assistant. In 2021, there were 8 position changes or new hires in the section. Training new staff and training for promotions does take time. So that was also part of our issue with pending claims. The pending claims, the numbers here are as of January 6th. I do have updated information as of today. For all the claims in-house, there's 163 for a total of about 2.85 million. So the number, the dollar amount didn't go down, but the number of claims in-house has gone down. In over 60 days, there are 83 claims for a total of about 1.47 million. And if anyone wants those exact numbers, come find me after and I can show you what that got. Those numbers that are on the screen from July 9th, that was the high watermark since I've been section chief. And I just wanted to show progress has been made. You know, we're working hard. We've got a good team in place who are very diligently trying to get these numbers where they need to be. This slide just shows the average number of claims over 60 days for the fiscal year. Again, that's actually we're back to June. So the fiscal year plus June of the last like 7 months. Again, these reports get run early in January for this meeting. So that's why January isn't on there. Some of our next steps that we're looking to do, obviously, is increase our efficiency, improve the reimbursement speed, decrease costs associated with the regulatory burden, and make Indiana competitive compared to other states. John's going to talk about the NPD cost guidelines that we think will help with all of these things. Additionally, like he's mentioned, we've tweaked our review process, and the pre-approval of costs, those claims go through the review process much faster. So that's a way that the outside consultants, they can speed up the time it takes us if they go through that pre-approval process. And that's all I have unless anyone has some questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lenz, members of the board. I know most of you. Been in the program, the Underground Storage Tank program at Highland for 25 years. So I've seen a lot of change take place. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to go over our current staffing levels. Currently have 5 environmental manager, 2 positions. We just recently filled one with a new staff member, Joshua Sneed, who just started this week, so you'll be seeing his name coming across in your reviews for project management. We have 3 vacancies in the EM2 level position, which is our entry level position currently. Actually, we did just get an acceptance on one of those. His name is Curtis McDonald. He will begin with IDEM February 7th, so we're happy to have 2 new staff members on board. So that actually leaves 2 vacancies at that project manager level for us, and both of those are posted. We have had difficulty getting our positions filled, just like most of the industry, I'm assuming, out there. 2 of our positions have been open for over 2 years, and then we had 2 staff members leave within the last year. And so those postings are taking 6 months at a time to get filled, just because we're not getting applicants in, we're not getting acceptances of offers and those types of things. So it's been a little bit of a struggle on our side of the fence, but we also have 7 senior project managers in the section, administrative assistant and clerical staff. At the senior project manager level position, I know we talked a little bit about field work earlier. In the next 3 years, we're going to be losing some of our most qualified professionals. We've got 4 people that are going to be retiring within the next 3 years. Each of those individuals have over 35 years of experience in this particular program. So it's going to be a big loss for us. And so we are trying to prepare ourselves for that, get these new staff members in and get them trained up. So just something to keep in mind.
Tim, how many people do you supervise?
Oh, I'm sorry. So when we're fully staffed, we'll have 17 staff, which is the largest section in OLQ. But ironically, we are down 4 staff from that 17. So at one point within the last 5 years, we had as many as 21 staff members. 3 of those positions were moved to other groups where the need was greater at that time. And then we had somebody on loan to us basically for many years from the Marion County Health Department. And that was Rosie Hansel, who retired earlier this year. So we're a big group and have a lot going on, as you all do as well. Just to give you guys an idea of the LUS program stats, new releases recorded in calendar year 2021, we had 153. So that includes both suspected and confirmed releases. At the end of the year, we had deactivated 32 of those releases. So around 121 actual confirmed releases during that time frame. Currently, we have approximately 905. Again, when this presentation was put together, we're under 900 active LUST incidents in our program right now. And over the course of the program, we've had over 10,500 LUST reported in the state of Indiana. Of that 905 active release count, about a third of those are ELF eligible currently. At last check, that was 312. I think it's up one today to 313. And that's pretty consistent over the life of the program, that only about a third at any given time are either applying or are eligible to the fund. So it's just an interesting statistic for me. Those other 66% are either utilizing funding through private insurance on their own dime or what have you, but only about 33% are even applying and or becoming eligible to the fund.
And when's the last time you had under 1,000 active?
Not in my life. not since I've been here in my 25 years. Right. It's a major milestone, absolutely. You know, to get under that 1,000 number and visually see that number go below that was a huge accomplishment for our group. And so we're really pleased and happy with that. And we expect in the coming year, you know, we'll be under that 700 mark into the 600s with our closure goals that are remaining for 2022. Just to kind of jump back up there under the discontinued sites remaining, we have 358 sites that are in this discontinued status. So those are still active cases or active sites. They were discontinued for many reasons through the years. We don't know all of the reasons, but that number has been driven down from, you know, the thousands down to that 358 number as well. So as we have new releases on those same properties, or as properties transfer, or we gain additional information, or we take another look at them from a risk-based perspective, we are able to drive down that discontinued site list. But generally, those are in the discontinued status because whatever we thought at the time that those releases were not of either high priority for us to spend our time and effort resources on at that time. So we have information on most of those. And we are going back through them as we have time. NFAs for federal fiscal year 21, our EPA set goal was 307, and we came in at 293, so we were a little below our goal. But I think we did a pretty good job on the sites closed. Conditional closures represented 48% of that 293 this year. So each year that number kind of drives up. Conditional closures, meaning that we utilize generally an institutional control, such as an environmental restrictive covenant, putting restrictions on deeds to properties and those types of things. So we're certainly utilizing those more and more for closure. And this last year we were at 48%.
Why would we want to put so many restrictions and not continue to clean it up to the lower level?
That's a good question.
Landowner and go ahead.
I think it's a good question, and we struggle with it internally too. So we know you all do it externally. We struggle with it internally. Some people want to clean sites up to you know, those target levels or those old levels that we used to have. But the matter of the fact is that we have a risk-based program in Indiana. It's pushed down from the federal level to the states, and that's what we're operating under. So we can't issue demands for a corrective action and ask somebody to do more than what is required of them. And so that's where we're at. You can certainly do those things. You can certainly perform corrective action. You can certainly try to get down to a lower level or zero or what have you, but we can't necessarily require it. We can only ensure that we've eliminated exposure to receptors. And so to the extent that you can utilize institutional controls to do that, that's what the agency is doing. And because of our choices in our risk-based program and our management, that does impact the funds. If it's not something that we require, it's not something generally that the fund is going to pay for. And so I know that's a major interest to everyone in the industry, but that's kind of where we're at.
So Indiana funding the federal, you can only clean up to a certain level with the federals?
I'm just saying risk-based corrective action is something on a national level that states are doing. It is something that EPA asks us to do for sure, absolutely. We receive grant funding from EPA to run our program. And so those things get pushed down to the states, and that's where we're at. These are the choices, and these are the decisions that are made in the state of Indiana based on our statutes and the adoption of our laws.
I think
I'm not an attorney.
maybe the bigger picture is, couldn't that hurt development, business development in the future? I know of some sites where, you know, they have an NFA with huge amounts of contamination. And the first thing the new owner wants to do is tear down the station, take out all the old tanks and put in new tanks. And so you have to deal with sometimes huge amounts of groundwater, and obviously blowing out these old tanks and the excavation that comes from that. But yet we have an ERC or NFA with an ERC, and so there's no funding available to that person to continue on with that cleanup. But yet they still have to, tank owners still have to, you know, get rid of that soil, get that new tank in the ground, and you know, pump and clean groundwater. They have to do all the things that would have been required if it was an active engineered remediation system. But yet there's no health funds now available because of the NFA. And so I get these questions all the time, maybe not from the current guy that got the NFA because he's ready to move on or retire or sell or whatever. But the next guy then is tasked with paying for that cleanup, you know, because it's had an NFA.
Or managing that waste, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I understand.
And sometimes that's very expensive.
Sure.
So why couldn't we reopen that under his example? Why couldn't that be revisited? Since you cleaned it, you only cleaned up halfway to begin with, and somebody goes and does something else, why, and they're required now to continue the cleanup.
So I don't think they're required to continue the cleanup. They may be required to handle that waste.
Okay.
And so when you're purchasing property, those are decisions that property owners make. And it's not something that we really get involved in or involve ourselves in. I absolutely understand you that, you know, if you're putting in new tanks, there's contaminated soil there, it has to be managed properly. It was from an ELF eligible release. That's something that you may all want to consider. I don't know that that's something that we have the authority to act on currently, but it's certainly something worth exploring.
Because I know there's always language, if we find out anything else, can we, you know, you can reopen this. Do you know of any case that's ever been done?
We have reopened some cases. So we did have a case where I think a water line was hit at a higher priority left site that had been closed, and it did mobilize some contamination. And we did reopen that case, allowed them to do work. They did receive reimbursement from the fund, and then we reclosed that release with them.
So in some cases, that's an option.
I think so.
But that's an option when conditions have changed.
Exactly.
Or
So
something has come to your attention that you didn't previously.
Such that it's created a new exposure or a new threat or something that needs to be evaluated.
But if the site closes, regardless of how much contamination was left, as long as it's under risk levels, you can't just open up the site to say, now we want to get the rest of it. If everything else is equal.
I guess that's a good question of people that manage the ELF fund. Yeah, I don't know.
I've asked specifically twice.
Yeah.
And they were denied.
Sure. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question is, we're only allowed to utilize the fund for corrective action. We don't have the authority to utilize the fund for redevelopment. And voluntarily, I guess, opening the site up and doing redevelopment is not something that we have the authority to do. We understand that. I used to work in brownfields for 5 years. I enjoy the redevelopment and support redevelopment of properties, especially contaminated properties. We've redeveloped on a lot of properties and saw projects redevelopment properties with worse contamination of petroleum and successfully redeveloped on top of that as long as you manage your exposure rates. If the Financial Insurance Board so desires to evaluate whether or not we want to open up the fund to allow for redevelopment costs or preventative maintenance with low interest loans or grants to owners and operators to maintain compliance, that's something we would certainly welcome talking about. And it kind of goes back in line with the 328 IAC2. So that is also an option that we could resurrect. We see obviously first generation tanks like Tom was talking about. If there's not compatible fuel held in one of these tanks, and we've seen tanks dissolve, we've seen tanks become structurally compromised. we don't see the releases like we used to historically. We don't see feet of product on sites. And it's a lot of that, I think, is attributable to the new equipment that the owners and operators are utilizing now today. We see the releases sooner, and also on top of the compliance program, just a little more of a robust compliance initiative. If we see something, we're looking to have those rectified. So a lot of that has gone into having these releases be less severe. But if we do nothing about these tanks and let these tanks go to 70 years or 80 years and continue to have, we support ethanol being in these tanks. It's providing a cleaner option for tanks. It's stimulating businesses and growth. We just didn't anticipate, I guess, these tanks being in first generation fiberglass tanks, ethanol. So we would hate to see catastrophic releases happen on the 283 tanks. That would be a significant burden to the fund. We most likely wouldn't see just the average of the national average of 150,000. It would be a little bit higher, $500,000 possibly. So you'd hate to see 200 $500,000 releases occur just because we didn't do anything about compatibility. But we support redevelopment. We understand the concern, obviously your predicament. Yeah, you have to manage your waste in accordance with the state, local, and federal rules. But right now we don't have the authority to allow reimbursement for voluntary action, which would be redevelopment. So, I'm sorry for.
No, thank you. John, I have a quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. It sounds like there has been some talk or some discussion about potentially, whether it's setting aside funds or being able to utilize funds to assist in redevelopment of sites with MFAs that still have residual impacts. And you know, you've been in brownfields. I do a lot of work in brownfields. We have a lot of clients who are hindered in their redevelopment because of whether it's managing waste with contamination or groundwater impacts that still may affect vapor intrusion, that affect the ERC. There's a lot of redevelopment of contaminated properties going. That seems to me an important potential use of the LTF funds to be able to potentially, well, not necessarily reopen sites, but is there a way, or do you envision a way to see the program being able to utilize funds to facilitate redevelopment in a case where there could be a potential risk exposure? Because obviously everybody here wants to see redevelopment happen, particularly on contaminated properties. And when there's not remediation that has occurred and there's ERC on the property, there's a lot of sites that are sitting in limbo because of whether it's restricted covenants or new exposure risks relative to new development opportunities.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would celebrate us evaluating whether or not we would open up the out to incorporate redevelopment and cost, as we're talking about here, raise and rebuild, moving soil, really, obviously dewater.
Waste management.
Waste management, investigator drive waste for construction. It's a construction project. Any type of exposure would be managed, obviously, in a construction exposure scenario. It would be short term. It wouldn't be something that would be a long-term exposure threat. We'd like to think that the site wouldn't have exacerbated situations for construction, obviously. If that is the case, we would look to address that, but I'm not sure we would recommend ELF for that because the owner or operator might have, through their negligent act, possibly caused that exacerbation. But we would have to do something else outside of what we currently have, our current guidelines. We'd have to open up the fund in some capacity, add that ability to incorporate redevelopment costs to manage ELF eligible soil and groundwater to help facilitate redevelopment. We currently don't have that. But we understand the concern and we welcome having these discussions. And I think it's a great idea personally. We'd like to see that, especially with these tanks being at the age we're seeing. We're mindful of that. When we see these 40, 50, 60-year-old tanks and we know that there's a finite number of contractors and a finite number of tanks. We know that we can't pull all 283 of these tanks in the next 6 months. So we're working with people. Obviously, we want to make sure that the structural assessment may be performed on the tank. If the tank's still in good condition, we're willing to work with owners and operators. My boss, Doug Loucks, made a policy call to ensure that we're working together with owners and operators to ensure that if the tank is not structurally compromised, that we've worked with the owner and operator to come up with a plan while that tank is still in use to figure out when we can get something that's more suitable if ethanol is being stored in the tank, for example. we've come across those situations. We've seen water get in the tanks and have phase separation, and that exacerbates the situation and causes, you know, some more degradation of tank performance. So we're doing our best. We're trying, you know, since I've been back here for 3 years, we've been doing this outreach. I know this happened before I even came back to the state. We've been doing outreach and saying this is coming. This is something that's been on the agenda. We need to start addressing this. We wanted to make owners and operators and consultants aware that this is a concern and a problem. And really for us, the big hurdle, I guess, that we overcame is we validated our tank data. You know, this is associated with our Epic database. We're in the process of developing. We had to have a better understanding of what tank components and data is where, and we've done that to about 95% of our sites. So we have a better understanding now of what's in the ground. Historically, we didn't have that better idea. So that was for a variety of record keeping issues, both internally, but also what was started to be able to.
Back to that last slide. If I got to that last little point there, our EPA cleanup goals or cleanup targets for fiscal year 22 is set at the same 307 level. We're going to struggle to meet that again this year. I think it's going to be even harder for us to get down to that. Meet that 307 number, but we're going to do our best to try and get there. Some quick technical updates. The risk-based disclosure guide, I believe, is in senior item management review. Okay, and so following signature of those updates to what was our remediation closure guide, is sometimes referred to as the R2, but I think is what will be known as the risk-based closure guide, is in senior management review for signature. And then after that point, I believe it will go out for public comment for 45 days. Then it will be presented to the Environmental Rules Board and then adopted thereafter that. So look for some updates coming there. Along with that, we will be updating chapter 3 of our program guide, which was the lost chapter previously. Some of the things that we're going to be addressing in our new program guide, in addition to updating processes, workflows, and those types of things, and forms, we're going to update to include high resolution site characterization information. We're going to talk about what to do at sites where we have multiple releases open at one time. We're going to talk about where we have left contamination in place and we've had a new release, and what the expectations are there, delineating an old plume versus trying to find out what's happening with a new plume, that kind of thing. Like I said, we'll also be updating some forms, and in particular, we'll be adding a new form, which is our risk assessment form, and a new form for corrective action plans. So that's what to look forward in our program guide update. I think as John talked about last time, there has been a change of the name to our section, although it's not really all that important to you all here. It was the impetus for changing the entire branch structure and branch name was that we are now taking on petroleum releases from other sources than regulated USTs. So we are taking on releases from ASTs, pipelines, other unregulated USTs, home tanks, those types of things. And so we have changed our name from the Licking Underground Storage Tank section to the remediation, the petroleum remediation section. With that comes all that additional work, albeit not quite as much as what we're currently dealing with coming in every year. My understanding is that we're getting about 30 new cases or other types of petroleum releases each year. Most of those are going through the independent closure process, which was something that was previously managed by our state cleanup program, and we've adopted. We did update an NPD to that effect in August of 2020, documenting that we're taking over that program. And so we've dedicated some resources to the management of that independent closure process. We have one full-time staff member, a project manager that helps shepherd and move those things through to closure. We have a senior environmental manager in our section that oversees, we wrote that NPD that makes sure that we're consistent with the decisions that we're making in our LUST program and those types of things. Currently, there's 352 of those other types of petroleum releases that we are now responsible for. And there may be as many as 200 more coming. We're still vetting data from our state connect section to determine, if there are additional sites that will be moving into that 352. So we could be up as high as 530 some additional sites that we're working on. As part of that update, taking on that additional work, it did necessitate us changing our release reporting forms, which affects our LESS program. We had to amend those forms to take on those people that weren't underground storage tank owners. So we made some minor updates to our forms. We also split it into 2 forms. So we have a suspected release form, which will be only a form that will be used by the regulated UST industry. And then we have a confirmed release form, which will be utilized by everyone for a confirmation of a release. The main updates are just contact information. There's some priority ranking information that's been updated and signatures and those types of things. So those are currently in state form review. So we're expecting that they'll be finalized in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll be pushing those out. And we will push those out through our Consultants Day. Hopefully we're having one this year in the first quarter. And we also intend to go a little bit more in depth on things that are going on in our program at Consultants Day, but we didn't think this was the forum today to talk about that. So if there's any other questions. All right, thanks guys.
I'm just going to give a brief branch update, and then also talk about the MPD. That's kind of the last thing I'm going to try to focus on here a little bit. We are in the process of working on our Epic database. Right now, from a go live standpoint, we have implemented a component of this mainly for operations and notification forms. So USD operations section, we've trained everyone in the month of the week of after Thanksgiving. We turned down our old database for data migration beginning of December. Our USD closures with our USD closure coordinator, Jeff Skull, went live December 13th. Internally, our registration for new facilities went live the 15th. Notification forms are now being processed in this new database, as well as billing. That will be going live February 1st. So we'll be able to bill in this new database. So we are implementing this from an internal standpoint. This is just an internal component of our database. We're in the pool, we're swimming, we're actually working out a little bit of the kinks and ensuring we're all working together to streamline our process and increase our review times. This fall, the portal will go live for owners and operators and consultants, and that will allow you to buy and sell a gas station online, pay tank fees. We anticipate the whole ELF reimbursement process being online in the fall of 2023. So that means claim submittal, processing, review should all be streamlined. That will help semi-automate a little bit of our processes, especially for the pre-approvals, to even increase our efficiency, obviously making sure that their backup documentation is there. We would like to think that the database will also automatically load on our budgets. We won't have to do that manual process. And what we'll do is, bless you, possibly flag things that might come up for a personal review, but we might have obviously the final QC portion still be maybe done by a person, but we're really trying to automate our claims review process. Tim's group, we anticipate will go live from a remediation management standpoint at sometime in 2024. That'll allow us to have a real-time access and communication in the database with our science services staff to help facilitate management of these projects, and also then compliance will go live in 2024. That'll be more of a regulatory, just a compliance inspection process that will be automated. I'm not sure exactly yet how we'll have this framed out. We'll have the inspectors have tablets with all this information right then and there, or have the database at the site as they're talking and working with owners and operators. But this should also help streamline our processes within the compliance inspections. Was there any questions regarding our database? We'd like to take a little bit of time to talk about our non-rule policy document. We Really, the purpose of the policy is to provide a process for expedited payment of certain claims submitted to this agency. Current regulations contain guidelines for reimbursement of certain specific tasks, including cost ranges and maximum reimbursement amounts. The regulations do not contain a process for expedited reimbursement as outlined in our NPD. The policy does not preclude claimants from seeking additional reimbursement or reimbursement of higher rates as listed within the policy if adequate documentation is provided to support the claim and justify a higher reimbursement amount. Claims submitted in accordance with this NPD will carry the presumption of approval unless case-specific circumstances would require additional information to confirm the claim. Once a claim is determined to be eligible for payment, it will be reimbursed at the rates listed in the policy. What we've come up with within the policy is a lot of common tasks that we see across our projects where we have had some wide variety of costs come through that do require us to provide potentially additional scrutiny or request that reasonableness and cost effectiveness determination. A lot of our work that we've done in this industry hasn't changed. We're still installing wells in accordance with DNR regulations. We're collecting our soil samples, our vapor samples, our water samples in the same process that we've done for many, many years, if not decades. And we've had a relatively similar report format and template for all of our initial site characterizations and further site and characterization reports. So we thought it would be beneficial to try to clarify what we would anticipate being a reasonable cost for this type of reporting to ensure that we process these claims in an efficient manner and possibly give consultants the ability to streamline and maybe become more efficient and make a little bit more money in some of this work too. So what we've established within this policy would be costs related to usually reporting or project planning and prep. So we have initial site characterization reports. And what I can do is go through the slides here. What we did within the non-real policy document was provide a number. And that was a lot of the questions that we did receive from the regulated community was, how'd you come up with it? How'd you come up with that number? And so it was important for us to at least provide this clarity of how we came up with our numbers. And that's really based on what we'd anticipate staff in the consulting world would take to prepare the document. Primary authorship is usually done by a project manager. That includes the historical research for initial site characterization. You need to have a better understanding of the surrounding area, water wells within the vicinity, any type of exposure threats, whether that be municipal waterways, creeks, streams, schools. There's a little bit of a historical review that is incorporated within these ISCs, and then that needs to be populated with the report. And so with that research and reporting, we've allocated 44 hours for a project manager to draft up this initial report. I feel that's a reasonable rate, especially when we have historical releases on a lot of our projects. But we wanted to account for one that may have never had a release on the site and account for that. Sometimes another consultant may come onto a project and they might need a truth check someone else's work. And you can't just rely on another person's work, especially when there's liability in hand. So we wanted as well for drafting, someone to create their own original CAD map for the project. So we needed to ensure that there was enough time for someone to create their base maps as well as populate their map moving forward. That could also possibly include cross sections. There's obviously project oversight, regulatory liaison, and senior review of the document. We need to ensure that there's accuracy within the document. So there is time for the senior project manager to discuss the project and review the work, as well as administrative support for providing deliverables to the client or to the regulatory agency. That has come out to be 78 hours. We round up instead of rounding down. So obviously we've come up with $6,800 for that. Oftentimes, yes, sir.
One question I really have about this, and I'm all for it, is the $6,800 like if a contractor does an ISC, and they just submit the ISC and then they'll waste $6,800 and they'll reimburse $6,800 and that's the end of the process, and they don't have to do any more documentation or all that stuff. Is that the way this is going to work for all those?
Yeah, I would imagine that the timesheets would be submitted as well, just the backup documentation that you incurred those costs, and obviously the report was submitted to this agency. So there would still obviously be the claim that would be prepared showing the hours. You know, if they say, for example, Jason did the work, and instead of 78 hours, he took 50. He could have 50 hours. You could just say on the claim, one ISC report for $6,800 and backup documentation would be 50 hours of time that took them to do the work. We would pay $6,800 for this report. I guess I've seen a little bit of a trend on all of our ISCs to be just basically 3 borings and 3 monitoring roles. Historically, sometimes you saw a variation. Sometimes it was 5 or 6 or 8. It's hard to delineate a plume when you have 1 boring in the source area and you have 2 other borings. You're missing 2 other principal directions of trying to delineate a plume. So the minor ISCs, our rule states that a minimum 3 borings must be done. You're never going to get characterization if you only need 3 borings. We don't need 78 borings in a gas station, obviously, but 5 or 6, you know, I think professional judgment should be taken into consideration for the consultants. If they're really wanting to go out in one mobilization, potentially delineate this plume, that's something to think about, whether you want to do 5 borings for an ISC. That's, just don't go do 25 if you're going to have, obviously, it's all based on what you find in the field. Your boring logs and your field screening, usually visual olfactory indication should dictate whether or not you need to do additional work. So oftentimes, we're still seeing when an ISC comes in, the plume is not defined. We, as an agency, since October of 2013, are wanting the plume to be delineated within 365 days of confirmation of the release. Historically, we saw a lot of FSI reports coming in. 3, 4, 5 FSI reports. And that was a significant amount of regulatory burden on us to review these documents. And when we requested delineate, you know, if you have 2 mobilizations or 3, do it. And give us that report within a year of confirmation of the release. And so we as an agency are trying to go back to that mindset is if you need more than 1 mobilization to delineate your plume, you have a year to do it, do it. We don't need 7 FSI reports. We just don't. And that just clogs us down from a review standpoint. So we're expecting one ISC, 1 FSI. Certain circumstances may change. A consultant may think that they're delineated and the project manager may not. At that point, we may request an additional FSI, maybe give us another 60 days. So we want to be flexible in that capacity. We just don't want to see 7 FSIs for the report. So the same thing with an FSI. You're still summarizing your installation of monitoring wells, borings. You've already created a lot of that template of the background information associated with the ISC. You're expanding upon that. You're talking about potentially exposure pathways, sensitive receptors, additional surveys. You're updating your conceptual cycle. So in this capacity, we've allocated 26 hours for a project manager to draft this report and provide a lot of the primary authorship of these tasks. Drafting also includes usually the cross sections. That does take time to create cross sections, both in 2 principal directions. And as well, still regulatory potential oversight, a liaison, senior review, as well as administrative support for creating such a document. So for this, it's 54 hours for $4,500 is what we've established as a common rate that we would see for a routine FSI for petroleum release here in the state of Indiana. We didn't incorporate project planning and prep for these investigations because of the wide variety of the variables that come into play related to these investigations. Sometimes underground storage tanks are on the property boundary. Sometimes you need to initiate and negotiate and access properties to put in additional borings. Sometimes that involves attorneys. Usually attorneys tend to slow down the process a little bit. Sorry for all the attorneys in the room. But when that gets, sorry, Nancy. These sites can get complex, and it's their property owner's right to evaluate this and determine if they want to provide access. So we didn't feel it was necessary or prudent to provide a clear, project planning and prep hour for investigations because there's a lot of variety in that variables, and we want to use professional judgment. So we didn't provide anything related to investigation for project planning and prep. We did for quarterly sampling. Quarterly sampling is a routine function that is performed on projects, or we could do semi-annual sampling or annual, depending if we want to go that route for the projects. It's pretty standard. It doesn't really matter how many wells you're doing, you still have to prepare the document. Now, you can get pre-labeled labels where you have to fill them out. That's one thing that might take longer if you have 6 wells versus 12 or 20. But overall, you're still maintaining and performing the same tasks. You're wanting to ensure you have all your documentation in line, your field notes package, site access agreements, safety, health and safety plan. Usually either the project manager or the technician would be the people doing the primary development of your paperwork and compilation of your supplies for the work. We still feel the senior project manager should probably check the work and review and approve that, as well as it could be a clerical person that might need to assist any type of work as well for preparing this package. So we thought 10 hours is very reasonable. Usually probably around the 5-hour range, but there could be variables that might be in play for very different companies and policies and procedures and SOPs to follow. So we thought this was something that would encompass the vast majority of our sites, and to reduce the scrutiny or uncertainty or questions, we came up with 10 hours to do this task for $809. I'm sorry, $850, we rounded up. We could have rounded that to $825, but we went to $850. I think that's the only project planning and prep task that we have within the MPD. Going into the quarterly monitoring and report writing, this goes back to report writing. It's a standardized report that you tend to see. Usually that first report might be one that, again, the report formats we have, a lot of the FSI report format and kind of the quarterly monitoring report format are similar functions. We're still summarizing the groundwater data you might have done with the FSI. You can still streamline that report format. But we acknowledge it could take a little time in that initial report generating that. But here we have 19 hours for $1,600 per site. This is where we assume for 12 monitoring wells because it might take more time on a complex project with additional data, especially from analytical concentrations. Now, if you have 12 monitoring wells and 11 of them are non-detect, it's going to take a lot less time. If you have 5 monitoring wells, it's going to take less time. We wanted to at least identify the fact that you could have the 20 or 30 wells. Hopefully, we don't have substantial releases that require that on our sites anymore. But there could be a component to where you might need additional time. And if you feel as a consultant or an owner operator that you need additional time part of this, we recommend you come to the pre-approval process and provide that clarity and justification to us. If you think that you can obviously do it for less time than 19 hours, then we recommend that. And obviously, same thing, you'd submit one quarterly monitoring report, $1,600, and then you provide backup documentation of the 7 hours it took you to do the work. The other component of this, well, there's 4 more things I believe in this policy here that we have. 3 of them are related to no further action requests. To give you a little bit of background, we structured internally a little bit of when we're going to request these reports. On a complex project with a lot of data, we might need that NFA report. If you just reported your release and it's only been open a year or 2, we might not need your NFA report. There's not much to summarize, but that's going to be kind of at the direction of the project managers and Tim Beach. But overall, we still may have work that is necessary to do to request NFA. This first level here is literally, I have nothing at my site on closure. Sometimes there's a report that's required, requested by your owner and operator to submit to us. And so this is a data compilation of a site that's going to go through an unconditional closure. There will be no deed restrictions or lines of evidence provided. It's pretty straightforward. We sometimes come across these sites, but I would say in our worldview, not many of them fit in this category. We're seeing more and more of them because our releases aren't severe. So we wanted to incorporate this though, at least provide a cost related to this task in case you find yourself in this situation. That would be 12 hours for $1,100. This NFA request here is using lines of evidence. We do come across a few sites where our contaminant concentrations are above regulatory thresholds, but they're not a threat to the healthy environment. And we're trying to be mindful of when we are demanding institutional controls or deed restrictions on your properties and parcels. If you can adequately justify and provide lines of evidence and reasoning of why you can close a site with levels of contamination above our screening levels and be an unrestricted closure, we would evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. Historically, we put ERCs on everything, and we didn't have much flexibility. And my boss, Doug Laux, is trying to obviously make sure that we're being a little more pragmatic in this approach, and that we are trying to work with you all and coming up with a possible closure alternative that is reasonable. For this report, 24 hours, $2,350. Majority of the sites we see fit in this category. This would be NFA request with ERC. This includes the drafting of the ERC and obviously an FAA report, and that could talk about the historical work that was done at the site, which could include remediation. We allowed in this one a principal review, it's a final review. We feel that that's warranted and reasonable. Same with the project manager, senior project manager oversight, like on the other reports. 34 hours for data assimilation report with the ERC prep. A lot of that's already been prepared because you're the primary author and done the work. That's not always the case. And so sometimes someone may need to go back and take a look at the prior consultant's work to summarize this information. We felt staff time should be assisting in maybe tabulation or getting a deed or possibly ERC preparation assistance, as well as obviously drafting, if there's any additional drafting that may need to be prepared. Usually there probably wouldn't be any additional data that's not outside another technical report, but there could be a use or need for drafting this report to try to maybe update your conceptual site model and maybe ISO concentration maps. So we included drafting of this report. This would be 57 hours for $5,500. Lastly, we wanted to provide clarity for claims preparation. We've seen kind of a wide variety of claims, and obviously the complexity of the claim, especially with the technical resubmittal, may require more time. If that's the case, we would work with you for a pre-approval process. But a lot of these claims have a handful of pay requests, and depending on if you do a dig and haul, you might need more time putting all those receipts in and to support the dig and how much tonnage you had. But a vast majority of our projects and sites in our current form, we feel this is a reasonable amount for reimbursement of a off-claim prep. And that would be 7.5 hours for $475. One thing I wanted to mention a little bit about this is the fact that our labor rates are updated every year. So the past years have gone down. We're 126 for senior project manager. I spoke to our finance and operations folks this morning. They'll be going up. We anticipate them going up this year. So that's something that we want to obviously be mindful of. That usually comes out in May, and we plan on doing that. We can still utilize the same hours for these documents, but when these labor rates are reflected and changed, we want to ensure that this policy is also updated to reflect those numbers. I expect the numbers to go up more than what we've seen in the rates. So I don't think it's the exact amount, but it's going to be pretty good. Obviously, everyone can see what it costs to go buy eggs at the grocery store. So that would be something that we should do. It's already in the rule that trumps this policy. So I just wanted to at least point that out, is that when our labor rates are updated, this document should also have an update. It should be an announcement. I'll leave it up to the attorneys of how that will be worked out, how we'll make that announcement and make that policy call. But we will update those accordingly on a yearly basis to ensure that we're balancing with our rule.
Well, I appreciate the work that you put in to this. Personally, I don't disagree with any of the rates that you've come up with or the structure that you've come up with. And I know that, at least I hope, that you're going to have some flexibility on some of those complex sites that where all of these just don't fit into that nice bucket.
Right. And
we, most of us have had projects or been involved in projects where it just didn't fit into a nice bucket. So, but as far as using those, this is a guideline. I think it's good that you put that together and everybody was sure. So.
I appreciate that. Yeah, not all of our sites, even though it's sandstone and clay here in Indiana, we have shallow bedrock in varying phases of the state. We have karst. We have utility corridors. Sometimes they're impacted. There are some complex sites. Sometimes we get multiple aquifers impacted. Sometimes there's multiple source areas. So when those sites are found or encountered, if you're looking to reduce uncertainty, we would welcome to the pre-approval process, and we would take that on a case-by-case basis.
If I may, for the board's information, under the statute and on the policy documents, these go into effect 30 days after presentation to the board. So this particular policy will go into effect on February 26th. That will be by count correctly. And to your point about updating it, whenever a normal policy document is updated, it goes through the same process of being published and then having a comment period and then being represented to the board. So that's how that process.
I think this is a good idea. It brings clarity and everybody's on the same page.
It should take care of the vast majority of the reporting and technical documents that come to our agency. And it should help us where we see a lot of that technical resubmittals. We can provide this. It streamlines the process, not only for the consultants, owners, and operators, but also for us internally. This will also reduce our claim review time. It should increase reimbursement amounts.
I agree.
Not to rush this along, but if no one else has any questions, I think some of our people that want to speak at the open forum will probably get impatient with this. So.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Before we get to that, though, I would like to say I think as a group we've talked, or at least emailed, and I think we'd like to meet quarterly or thereabouts. And while we're all in the room here, we're thinking sometime in late April. I think is that what we came up with?
Early March.
I know that IFFA has an event, I think the third week, so we probably need to stay away from that. So that's okay with you.
Yeah, we have a room reserved, and I think Colonel has the dates in those. We have a room reserved for the, I believe, the third Thursday of each month. Fourth Thursday.
Yeah, I'll send the dates of March and April tomorrow morning to the board and let you know.
But I don't want to speak for everybody. Is that okay with the rest of the board?
The March date reserved is March 24th, and the April date is April 28th. We need to start with April. We need a different one, but this will be the same way.
I'm okay with April 28th if everybody else on the board is.
I plan for that, and then if something should come up for folks, we always have another date for the following month that we can take. It's very difficult to get these rooms, so we actually try to reserve them when we need to pay. I know looking at the room, maybe not yet, but it's,
thanks. And I haven't been to every FAB board meeting, but I've been to a few of them, so I know we're running longer probably than normal. One part of that is just getting used to all the changes that are coming, and because essentially almost a new board, except right. But we do want to allow time. I think we all do for anyone who would like to speak at the open forum and not cut any be photo short. So move on to that. Open forum section for anyone who'd like to speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Nick Stanley. I'm with JJ's Convenience Stores, headquartered in Huntington, Indiana. My sister and I are the third generation owners of our family convenience store business. We own 8 sites, soon UST sites, soon to be 9. I just wanted to address the board today about concerns that we've had. Definitely heard some good discussions today. The non-real policy document is a good framework. But as was brought up earlier, as site owners, we're really concerned about the early NFAs and not cleaning up sites. I don't know whether it's coming from the feds or what changed, but we used to clean up sites and now we're not. And it's just being pushed back onto us, and we're not using the fund for what I think it was designed for. I believe the legislature intended it for. They created it. So we're just concerned there. And then the denied costs, this reasonable and cost effectiveness denials, I don't know where it came from. I think I have an idea that 1 or 2 bad apples have kind of ruined it. And I do feel that the agency and the state of Indiana is penalizing those of us that have worked really hard to clean up our sites, worked really hard to be compliant, and put a lot of money into our underground storage tank systems. And it almost was retroactively applied to us. Work was done in 2019 that I guess the lust section, as it was called at that time, asked us to do as tank owners. We had our consultants do it, and now the ELF claim is being denied. I don't know what we were supposed to do with business owners in that situation, when one hand is telling us to do one thing and the other hand tells us, no, you can't do that. It wasn't reasonable, cost effective. We're seeing things like items no longer approving monitoring equipment that my consultant has to take out to the site with them when they do monitoring, quarterly monitoring events. And they won't reimburse for that because they said they reimbursed for it before, but they still have to take it to the site. So I feel like there's 99% good tank owners, responsible tank owners, and the consultants that we're hiring and overseeing. And ultimately, it is my responsibility as the underground storage tank owner to clean up and take care of and be in compliance with my sites. And one or two good guys have changed the rules for all of us and somewhat retroactively. So now it's something we did way back when we didn't know the rules were going to change, and now they're not paying us for it. So just to give you some examples, the amount of denied claims as of recently, just for my small company, is pushing $64,000. And I just received word today that we had another $10,000 in denials. Not exactly 10,000, but 10,000 some change. So, what are we supposed to do as tank owners to get responsible reimbursement from the fund? I would love to see that the fund being used for what it's intended. I see the fund balance continuing to grow. So why are we not using the fund for what's intended for?
Thank you, Nick. I think it's great to have tank owners in the audience and speak to us.
Thank you. Please.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you to the Financial Assurance Board for allowing me a few moments just to share some thoughts. My name is Ron Freeman, and I'm the past president and CEO of J Petroleum Incorporated, headquartered in Portland, Indiana, and I currently serve as the company's ESOP board chairman. I was employed with the company for 37 years, the last 23 as its president, and I retired at the end of 2020. Currently, J Petroleum operates 57 retail gasoline and convenience store sites, of which 30 are located in Indiana. We have 117 USTs at those sites. Just as a point of reference, our total dollar amount of claims submitted through the end of 2021 is $4,591,845.77. The total number of lost incidents eligible to receive reimbursement is 15. Our total number of NFAs is 21. And since September of 2000, the total amount that has been denied by IDEM for various reasons is $112,350.85. So I'll try to keep my remarks brief, but let me step back in time to 1998. At that time, Indiana had more than 40,000 USTs. Today, that number is something around 13,000. In 1998, there were more than 5,000 open UST releases in Indiana. Now there are less than 1,000. In 1998, petroleum jobbers such as J Petroleum recognized that if we were going to continue to grow our business model of convenient shopping while selling fuel, then a substantial investment had to be made to our UST systems. At the same time, understanding the federal compliance regulations regarding petroleum releases and the ensuing investigation process was daunting. However, with the guidance of professional qualified environmental consultants and the creation of the ELF Fund, we, that is J Petroleum, as evidenced by our 21 NFAs, began to tackle the problem. As a result of the ELF Fund, efforts to facilitate the remediation of petroleum releases and cleanups from major leaks and spills has made Indiana a respected leader in the Midwest. Until recently, I would suggest that the fund has been properly managed, handled and utilized by IDEM and the Financial Assurance Board. However, some things have changed. While the ELF Fund currently shows a healthy 130 million plus balance, and the number of UST releases continues to decline, access to the funds by Indiana's petroleum jobbers has been met with roadblocks. After more than two decades of a track record of successful environmental remediation, one would think the process would have become well-refined and straightforward. Instead, we have found it to be less effective and more costly. So what has changed? Why are IDEM project managers and ELF claim managers who have little or maybe no field experience denying claims and costs they deem excessive, all the while making management decisions that affect the financial bottom line of tank owners? Why are sites being closed out with an NFA and ERC while in some cases petroleum impact is left at the ground? With a healthy ELF fund, should tank owners have to accept these risks? And more importantly, shouldn't the citizens of Indiana expect more from their tax dollars? And finally, why has IDEM recently begun bypassing professionally trained field experts, the environmental consultants? These are the individuals that should be acting in the best interest of their clients to protect human health and the environment and to achieve the most cost-effective closure approach. That's been our experience at J. Petroleum for more than 2 decades. In closing, I know that IDEM is facing a lawsuit by an environmental consultant that many believe was not looking out for his client's best interest, but his own. And that's unfortunate. But the knee-jerk reaction cannot be to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I urge the FAB and IDEM to return to using the ELF fund for the purpose it was intended. There is no prudent reason not to do active remediation at UST sites to achieve closure and to pay for those services from the fund. Thank you.
That's right. We don't get, this board probably hasn't seen too many tank owners at this meeting, etc.
No, David, no.
So I hope you guys both make this a habit and tell your friends and bring them.
Good afternoon, and I'll be brief also. Chris Braun, Blue Shadow Reach from Braun and General Counsel for the Indiana Food and Fuel Association. And I want to echo the comments by the other tank owners who are members of the association. And I want to focus on 2 things briefly. One is the non-rule policy document is outstanding. And it's something that we've looked for a long time, and we applaud the agency in going forward and taking the data they've developed over time to come up with these reasonable cost numbers. And one of the things that's a great indication of how well it was done is the fact that only 2 consultants provided comments, even though it was put out for public consumption and response. Creek Run and Wilcox did not criticize or complain about any of the proposed levels. They simply asked for clarification. And those were questions we thought were reasonable. We would ask that the agency, as it moves forward, does get back to it and provide that clarity going forward, because I think it'd be helpful. And what's nice about it is it rewards efficiency. And so as John was indicating, if someone does a task that you've allocated $6,800 for and they get it done for $5,000, good for them. If somebody spends $8,000 and they only get reimbursed $6,500, well, then so be it. That's the rule of the game. But we think that's a huge step forward, and it makes objective a previously subjective process, which I think is outstanding. So we applaud the agency. We encourage it to go forward, answer those questions, and we, as tank owners, support this. And we think it will help reduce the costs. And then the other thing I want to touch on is, and the agency has had in the past spreadsheets and documents that help show not only, and it's great that the agency has substantially reduced the time for processing claims. I think that's outstanding. Bringing on more personnel, getting them trained is all greatly appreciated. Dropping it from 90 days down to less than 30 is outstanding. So again, we applaud the agency for that. But we do think that you need to provide not just that, but you need to provide also the reimbursement percentages. You used to provide that. You used to show how much went to, could be deductibles, could be reduced percentage eligibility, but you also showed here's how much in claims were submitted, here's how many we administered, here's what was approved, here's what was reimbursed, on a more global and holistic approach that we think was more helpful. You saw today there were some challenges in trying to interpret the data in part because of that. So we would encourage agency to go back to a format that you had before. You can certainly update it with the data you've got now, but use that so it provides a better indication that tank owners and consultants are getting 80, 90, 95% reimbursement as opposed to the indications here. And then the other thing that I want to just draw your attention to is, and it goes back to the fact that the fund balance is now at $135 million. That's the record level. It's never been that high since it incepted. And when you look at the last 3 years, you've got here on the documents that were provided, the fiscal 2020 revenue and payout, you had a surplus of over 22 million. Fiscal year 2021, you had a fiscal excess of 35 million. And this year, you're on a pace to pay 8 million in claims and $46 million in revenue, another $38 million surplus. And so if you're only paying, and it looks like last year you paid 8 million in claims, this year you're on a revenue payout of 8 million. If you project that out, we've got about a 16 or 17 year surplus of annual payouts. And so with that kind of reserve, we would embrace conversations with the agency, which has been alluded to today by John and others, about perhaps looking at ways, for instance, we had some years where we took $5 million a year and threw over brownfields to deal with abandoned gas stations. That's a great use. It's related to the industry. It takes care of eyesores, et cetera. But we would certainly welcome, in addition to the other good things the agency is doing with the non-rule policy document, with reducing claim time, is to maybe have a discussion about what can we do consistent with the purposes for which the money was received and generated by tank owners and by motorists to come up with additional ways to use money that will help allow the industry to maintain or increase compliance, get more sites cleaned up, et cetera. So given the kind of buffer we have, and I encourage us to be proactive now, because next year is going to be a budget year. Obviously, the state of Indiana, unfortunately, is flush with cash right now. So we're not worried about the fund being rated this year, knock on wood, but things could change. And I think if we're proactive and thinking of ways in which we can further the interests of the industry and of the agency getting sites cleaned up in a variety of ways and or preventing releases, I think it would serve all of us well and be able to take something perhaps to the legislature next year to help use some of these dollars, because otherwise we're going to be sitting at $160, $170 million next year. And at some point, our friends over in the State House are probably going to look at this and say, this is far more than you need. So perhaps we need to come up with ways to more productively use it. But otherwise, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the FAB, for your continued oversight of the Excess Liability Trust Fund and the UST performance by the agency. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
I have one person online who would like to speak, and also 2 questions regarding the entity as well. I'll have El Nielsen go ahead, and I'll have you unmute and introduce yourself and then provide your comment.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name's Lauren Nielsen, and I'm currently with Acuity Environmental Solutions. And I wanted to see what the FAB's plan was to allocate some of this surplus money, which is what Chris Braun was just alluding to do more preventive maintenance. I know that it's everyone's goal to have a pristine site, but it's a little bit too little too late once there's already been an accident. So given that the regulations are in place because they are intended to prevent releases, like having double wall equipment and stuff, how can we redirect some of those things, some of the resources to incentivizing or maybe provide grant money to people who need to upgrade their equipment instead of waiting till an accident has happened and then clean it up? Thank you.
Anybody have a comment to that? I think a lot of us are in agreement with you, and I think it was Tim that brought that up as well.
I would think what we want to do is collect ideas for that, and obviously we can't answer that as a board right now, but
If I may, the uses for the financial assurance fund are statutory. So if you want to change the uses for this fund, you need to change the statute. We can't do it by thoughts or rules or anything else. We need to look at the statute and decide what makes sense in terms of the ability to amend the uses for the fund.
Right, so I'm thinking, you know, we talk about ideas and there's one or two that people really like and the group overall supports them. Then we can look at, is that something we want to do as far as changing the rules of the game, so to speak? If we don't come up with anything we want to do, then we don't want to open up
It would be a tough hill to climb, is what you're saying, regardless of the approach we took. So it's
if
gonna
there's
take some
20
more conversation.
Right, if there's 20 different ideas and then we can agree on one, that's a loser, right? But if we talk about it and there's 2 or 3 or 1 just rises to the top and say, you know, that's a good one to tackle and everybody wants to do that, then the step would be, do we actually want to open that up and change that?
Sounds like there's a lot of interest, and I think it's important to evaluate, can we use the fund for preventative maintenance measures or upgrading dilapidated systems or long-term stewardship of sites with ERCs. I think these are things that people are interested in and that this board needs to look at.
Yeah, we've heard 4 just today, right? 4 or 5 different comments.
And if it does take going to statutory changes, there are, at least based on this conversation today, at least 2 right there we talked about, maybe 4 that would have a lot of legs that I think we need to talk about. Seems to be that we'd have a lot of support to go through that effort, particularly long-term stewardship of sites with ERCs and potential preventative maintenance at sites with the amount of money that is available in the fund, to Chris's point.
And I think that if you came up with those ideas and any of those had legs, how would you do it? Would you do it a percentage of the fund? Would you do it setting boundaries with some dollar amount? Because obviously the primary focus of the fund is the reimbursement of the cleanups, right? And so you don't want to shortchange that because you gave too much money for this other activity. So you kind of have to look at how would that play out? What would you do the first year? How successful was that? Would you gradually implement it? So I think there's a lot of discussion. That's my point, is that there's probably discussion about collecting ideas and how would that work before we ever went to.
Absolutely, because if you look at the history of the fund, there was a point at which this fund was nearly bankrupt, doing just what it does now. Right. So that is the mindset that has driven the basically the stewardship of this fund for many, many years. And until we got that the inspection tax money into this fund, we were very close to being belly up, basically. So that concept, and also there was the time when we had that amount that we had to take out every year for
well, I lived through those
and so
priority years.
Yeah, and those were,
I don't want to go through that ever again.
And that was, I think that was always in the mindset of the FAD board members then and the agency, and as well as how the law was written at that time. So those are that's the background that you're dealing with when you come up with new uses for the fund.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right, and I just have these 2 questions here that were regarding the NPD. I'm going to maybe address these. First one from Elizabeth McKinney, asking why are staff level rates being used for some of the cost guidelines in the NP on reporting when it states in the health rule that project manager is used for technical report writing. Why is the health rule not being followed for coming up with these cost guidelines? Should this be a rule change if we will be using rates and levels for certain tasks that do not follow the health?
I would agree with that comment. I would agree with that comment. How it's currently written right now is project manager can do everything. Updating your tables, which is a routine function. So if that's something that we want to take a look at to incorporate, there are certain, obviously, levels of work that's being performed on a report that is routine. The actual tabulation of the electronic data documents, the actual analytical data, we used to have our administrative people do when I was a consultant. Didn't even need to be a project manager to populate your table. Didn't even need to be a staff or technician. We had the administrative person, Control C, Control V. But in this instance, this is how we structured it and set it up and thought this would be, there are components of that report that would be routine. So if it's something that we got ahead of ourselves with and we want to just utilize project manager times for our rates and rules, we will do that. And we'll just allow that, and we'll take that into consideration when we redo our rule regarding report writing, because there are certain components and tasks that you don't need a project manager to do. That would be my answer to that question.
And the second question is from Dennis Livingston, and he says cross sections were mentioned in the drafting portion of the report preparation costs. While the draftsman typically transfers the information into a figure, for example, via CAD, cross sections, groundwater flow maps, and flume maps can be created by and interpreted by a geologist, engineer, and or environmental scientist. Why is there no time for that?
I guess there would be, that would be also part of that report writing. And so we wanted to allocate, I guess, some time for the cross sections to be populated within CAD. But holistically, having a geologist obviously do interpretation of lithology when they are conceptually developing that, it is done usually by the scientist or the professional and then provided to the CAD operator. So that time is baked into the report writing as well.
Just had one more question come in for Tom Newcomb. She's asking, can you clarify how tank owners and operators can independently verify that contractors are certified by Homeland Security?
Okay, just to be clear, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management has no regulatory authority over contractors. We do not certify them. We don't, generally speaking, maintain or observation of their certifications. The Indiana Department of Homeland Security does, and they do maintain a website that's, I can't rattle off the actual web address, but you can go there to actually do a search. If somebody wants to email me, I can provide that quickly via an email. But you can also call the same number that's been around for the last 25 years, which is 317-232-2222, which is the UST desk for the State Farm Marshal's UST division. And Christine Klaus should be able to look up that information quickly on an individual basis.
That's all.
Anyone else in the audience like to speak? Need a motion to adjourn? If that's what we want to do. Need a second?
I'll second.
Everybody in agreement, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. See you in April.